Muted.
All right, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us on Friday morning. We hope that we're doing this webinar thing correctly. We are still a little new at this. If you're having any problems with the technology, I don't know, you can try to put a little note in the text box, or if worse comes to worse, you can send me a text or call me on my cell, 812-322-1014, or send me an email. I'll be watching. In any case, thank you all again for joining us. Important topic this morning. Thank Caitlin from the IQE side of our operation for joining us this morning, for putting together this webinar, and much more importantly, for spending her entire life pretty much since January hanging out at the State House, watching and influencing all of this work for us on our behalf. So I can't think of any other housekeeping things we need to do, so we'll just let Caitlin get started. Feel free to toss any questions that you have for her in the text box as we go along, and we can hopefully answer questions as we go, and we'll certainly save time at the end for more questions too. If there's anything we don't end up covering that you all want to talk about, hopefully we'll have time. We should have plenty of time at the end, and if it's something that we can't answer today, we'll certainly be happy to follow up on it. But with that, thank you again, Caitlin, and take it away.
Thank you, everyone.
So as Marcy mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for questions, but please, as I kind of run through these, if you have questions on any specific slide or bill that we talk about, please feel free to type it in there. You know, I think everyone is muted so that we're not hearing static on our end, so we'll do our best to unmute people if folks want to chat at the end. So again, we're new at this technology, so let us know if we're screwing up in any way. So with that, my plan is to kind of cover all the highlights from a school funding perspective and things that will impact charters the most. So we'll talk about 1001, our budget bill, which includes a lot of funding and other information, and then some major K-12 legislation that impacts all providers, not just charters. Some miscellaneous stuff that is more focused on charter schools and the impact you guys will have, and then again, we'll have time for questions. So starting off with our kind of the overview of the state budget, where we ended up from a school funding perspective. The legislature increased K-12 funding by $345 million over the biennium over the next 2 years. Most of you already know this. We try to hit it all the time, but K-12 makes up more than 50% of our state budget. So with all the needs, even with the legislature looking to do more road funding and other areas, they still found a way to increase funding in a pot that is, you know, the more we increase K-12, we typically have to take it away from someone else. So while we may not think there's always enough money, we are in pretty good shape compared to some of the other things that get funded in the budget. So we return to a single count date for funding purposes in the budget. So there will still be a spring count date, but it will be for information purposes only. So all funding that you'll receive will be based on your fall student count date. The increase to foundation grants, so every single student will see an increase in their foundation. We went from just around $5,000 to $5,200 next year, and then $5,300 in fiscal year 19. The complexity calculation remains based on the direct certification. There are a couple adjustments in how this works, particularly for some schools who have high ELL populations and who show a significant decrease in complexity, in their complexity index, so 45%. When I looked through the funding runs, based on the estimates we have today, I don't think that there's a single charter school that meets that 45% decrease in complexity to qualify for this extra bit. I think, you know, it applies to a small handful of schools at best. The non-English grant is outside of the funding formula. It's a categorical, but the legislature did increase funding for this, so we go up to $250 per pupil in fiscal year 18 and $300 per pupil in fiscal year 19. They do give an extra bump here for schools who have high ELL populations. So as you can see, if you've got if 5 to 18% of your population is ELL, you get an extra $975 in 18 and just over $1,000 in 19. And so that is for every pupil above your 5%. So 6% through 18% would get that extra amount. And then there's an even higher bump for if you're 18% or more ELL population. The special ed, the severe category was increased in the funding formula. All the other SPED categories stayed the same in the funding, in the formula. CTE grants, I know there was a number of conversations about CTE throughout the session. Senate Bill 198, it ultimately passed and kind of realigns CTE. It doesn't make any changes until fiscal year 19. But so the CTE grants, you'll notice in the second year of the budget, will be reclassified and consolidated. Essentially, we're going to have fewer categories, and the funding will change. So we can talk more about that later if you want. $30 million for teacher appreciation grants. So this is kind of, in the past, we've had the teacher performance grants. It was $40 million last time around. The House at first said, you know, we don't really like the way these have gone out. We'd rather just give all the money to schools and let them determine how to divide that up, whether it makes more sense for them to use it, you know, in their classroom activities or for teacher pay, but give the schools the flexibility to do that. The Senate really pushed on wanting a specific pot of money just for teachers. So they ended up with $30 million. It has to go to highly effective and effective teachers. The one caveat that is put in here, there's been a lot of conversation. Many folks in the legislature have been frustrated with the differentiation and how many school corporations have given kind of, here's $1 more to our highly effective than our effective. And so they put in a requirement that, you can distribute these dollars however you like to your highly effective and effective teachers, but your highly effective teachers have to receive at least 25% more than your effective teachers do. So that was their way of ensuring that there's some reasonable differentiation. Now to some more charter school specific items in the budget bill. First and foremost, the big thing we worked on this session for charters is the facility funding. This actually kind of flew under the radar a little more than we expected, which is a positive thing. Legislators have come to understand that this is a necessity, it's unfair, and we didn't have to put up a huge fight for this. Now I will say when we tried to get more, we did get a lot of pushback. So it maintains the $500 per pupil for charter schools. If you remember from last time around, there are qualifications on which charters are eligible. So that list of qualifications stays the same. A, B, and C rated schools, if you're in your first or second year of operation, have a null letter grade, or if you have a special population of students. So, and that that extra piece that the state board kind of has to determine is if you're equal or better than, the closest neighboring traditional public school, which can get complicated at times. But all in all, we're happy that this funding is there. We appropriated $15 million each year to fund this. Last time around, it was a $10 million appropriation, so we should have enough money in there to, if we have some charter school growth, to make sure everyone gets covered at that $500 per pupil amount. Moving on to adult charter high schools. As I know a few of you on the line know and understand how adult charter high schools are funded. They're outside of the funding formula in a separate line item. So they receive, moving forward from this budget, $6,750 per pupil. The chart below shows how many eligible seats and students they can have. So I know we worked with Crystal House and Excel on expansion numbers that they needed. So it's not ideally where we wanted to be, but it's better than we were in the Senate budget anyway. So we'll continue to work on that moving forward. Virtual charter schools, their funding remains at 90% of tuition support. The House had put it at 100 for the second, budget cycle in a row, but the Senate continues to push back on virtual charters. There's really just kind of a lack of understanding and belief of virtual charters in the Senate chamber, and we really need to do a better job of helping folks understand the importance of virtuals and how that is a great fit for some students. They also tagged on additional reporting requirements. I think most of these requirements are things that virtuals are already reporting, that all schools are already reporting. So virtual charters will now have to report to the DOE class sizes, student-teacher ratio, and one that'll be interesting to see how they actually measure this is the number of teacher-student meetings, both online and in person. So again, a lot of this goes to the lack of understanding from some of the folks in the Senate about how virtual schools operate. They're also limited on the amount of teacher appreciation grants they can receive. As you remember from a few slides ago, we said it's $30 per pupil that a school is eligible to receive in total teacher appreciation grants. Virtuals will be limited to no more than what the per teacher average is. So they will likely receive less than $30 per pupil based on their numbers. Moving on to Innovation Network charter schools. So there was a modification that was done last year to kind of hold some schools harmless. I'm not sure if anyone from Kipper and LaSalle are on the line right now, but we've worked with those folks in IPS. So schools that were brought in that were standalone charters before they became an IPS innovation charter, they had their own school funding run, their own complexity index. So anyway, we worked with the Senate to include some the House and the Senate, excuse me, to include some hold harmless language so that, any innovation charters that existed prior to 2016, if they have a higher complexity index than IPS, they will remain funded separately. So the money will still flow through IPS, but the calculation will be based on that individual charter school as a whole. So what we saw was, for example, KIPP has a higher complexity index than IPS. When you move all of KIPP students into IPS, it wasn't enough to make IPS's complexity jump up. So KIPP would have actually lost money, their per pupil amount. So we wanted to make sure that we continue to fund students equitably. This hold harmless will help KIPP, I think, based on how we do complexity, and LASE is still included under IPS because they have a lower complexity rate, whether that's an artificial rate or not, we could have a separate discussion on. But that's where we stand with innovation in the funding. So moving on, I guess just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the box. I haven't seen any pop up yet. Moving on to some other major education bills, everyone is probably tired of talking about assessment. House Bill 1003 was the assessment bill that replaces ISTEP. So most of this is based off of the core of the bill is based off of the recommendations from the ISTEP panel, the group that met over the summer and made recommendations. So the new assessment will begin in the 18-19 school year. So spring of 19, when you're doing your testing, you'll see a new test. The DOE and the state board have a tremendous amount of flexibility to, go through the RFP process, work with vendors to create a test that meets federal requirements. So we have to, test English, language arts, math, grades 3 through 8, and then, once in high school. So very similar to our current requirements, we've got to meet federal law unless we want to lose federal title dollars. Some of the more noticeable things that you'll see, the testing window, we'll have one testing window, and it's going to be at close to the end of the school year as possible. So instead of two ISTEP windows, it'll be down to one, and hopefully move to the end of the year so you're not interrupting teaching time in March to give a test. From a high school perspective, you'll probably see a bigger difference in how things will move from the high school. So we're going to replace the ISTEP 10 and go back to end-of-course assessments, biology, Algebra 1, and English. They're also, this bill also requires them to create like a U.S. history or U.S. government ECA. They don't require the ECA to be used, but it allows schools to use it if they like. The more interesting change with ECAs is that it's no longer going to be the GQE requirement. So we are going to move to a pathway, kind of a pathway approach. So every student has to meet a certain benchmark or pathway to graduate. It could potentially be a combination of ECA passing scores, but this will reduce the need to give an ECA. Any student that doesn't pass, go through remediation and continue taking ECAs in that cycle until the student passes, just to meet their graduation qualifying requirements. So the pathways will look, essentially the state board will set the rules for the pathways, but it could be, a remediation-free SAT or ACT score. It could be a combination of AP and IB courses, industry-recognized certifications, an ASVAB score. The goal is to make sure that we're not, forcing everyone down the college pathway, but recognizing that there's more to college post-graduation, and how do we make sure our students are prepared for that. Optional benchmark assessment. So what you guys know is the formative assessment grants now. Those will continue, but the state board is required to make sure that whatever assessments, benchmark assessments they fund, that they must be aligned to our summative. And I see a couple questions popping up here, so. So going back to Tommy's question about confirming that the single count date is effective this coming year, yes. Beginning this next school year, we're going to be back to a single count date. And Ryan's question, high school testing changes begin next year. Is this for the class of 2020? Will the class of 2018 and 2019 still be on the ISTEP test to graduate? So I think a lot of this will determine on how the state board and the DOE work together. I think everyone will be, in spring of 19, everyone will be taking the new assessment, the new ISTEP, or iLearn is what it's called. This could look very similar to what we're taking now, except in the one window. It could potentially be more of a adaptive model, assuming it still meets all the requirements. So it's really going to determine on the RFP. But beginning in 18-19, everyone will take iLearn, the new test. I hope that answers the question. If not, let me know. House Bill 1004 was the state's pre-K bill. This bill expands the current pre-K pilot. So right now we have 5 counties in the pilot. This bill allows an additional 15 counties to become part of the pilot. FSSA will get to choose who those counties are based on. Every county in the state has the ability to apply. They'll look at needs, how many students there are ready and able to go in, and providers as well. House Bill 1001, our budget bill, appropriates $22 million in each year of the biennium for the pre-K pilot program. Currently, we spend a total of $12 million each year, so it's a $10 million increase each year for the pre-K investment. The eligibility stays the same at 127% at federal poverty level. There is a caveat in there for any of the existing counties. If they're at capacity, they can bump up to 185%. We don't think that'll happen. Potentially Vanderburgh County is the only place that we may see that, but likely not in year 1. Parent eligibility, this is something that the Senate really pushed on. They want to make sure that if there's a child receiving a pre-K scholarship, that the parent's either working, attending job training, or actively seeking employment. So, and probably the most talked about piece of this bill is actually the smallest provision in there and will have the least impact. But it allows any pre-K, any student who receives a pre-K scholarship to have a choice scholarship in kindergarten, but only if they remain in the same school. So there are a very small number of all the pre-K providers right now that are also voucher schools. So the whole point of this provision is to make sure that if a student is in a school and doing well, and they want to stay in that environment, that their financial reasons don't cause them to have to leave and disrupt that student's schooling. House Bill 1005 is the appointed superintendent bill. This was a governor agenda bill as well as an IQE agenda bill. We're glad that it has passed. We would have liked to see it in a little different form. So this requires the governor to appoint a Secretary of Education beginning in 2025. So we've got another election cycle to get through before this actually happens. So we'll be electing a superintendent in 4 years from now, and then after that we'll move to an appointed. There is a 2-year residency requirement and some other qualifications that will the governor will have to abide by when selecting their Secretary of Education. Must have an advanced degree and have 5 years of experience as a licensed teacher, principal, or superintendent. So there were some folks, including us, who would have liked the cleaner version in the House that didn't have kind of all these requirements. When you look at all the other governor appointees, people who run other agencies, there are no similar requirements. We elect the governor, and we expect him or her to be able to pick the most qualified people. But it's better than nothing. So moving on, House Bill 1007. About very much. It kind of flew under the radar, surprisingly so, but it creates a course access program. I think this one has a huge potential for students and schools, depending on how much they want to think outside of the box and what fits for them. So this essentially requires the DOE to create and oversee a course access program before the 18-19 school year. The DOE has to approve course providers, courses, what those fees will be, and kind of navigate that whole world. So really, we're kind of waiting on them to set up a best program here. It will give any student who's pursuing an Indiana diploma the ability to pick and choose a course. So funding will vary based on where that student is. If they're in a corporation, if they're in a public school, they will, and they find a course that they don't have access to at their school, they can take it. Some of these will be online. Some of these could be through partnerships with other schools or higher ed institutes. Really, the sky's the limit, and we're looking forward to seeing some of the creative arrangements that will come up with this, but we're excited for the opportunities it gives students and the flexibility it will give schools to maybe be able to focus on things that they're great at, but not everyone can have the best AP chemistry teacher in the state, and so if we can get more kids access to higher level courses or CTE work, I think it's a great step forward.
Can I pause you for a question, Caitlin, that I just got?
Sure.
From Carrie is wondering, will adult high schools be eligible for the ELL funding bump?
I have to go back and double check that, Carrie. They may be, but I need to double check that for you.
And another question just came in. Will there be a cost to schools for the course access?
So a lot of the details are yet to be figured out with the department. So the cost for schools could be, the cost of enrolling a student, right? So if a school decides, it makes more sense for me to provide, AP, pick a course through this course access program. Maybe we work with a neighboring school corporation to do it. Maybe we have some online component. It's more effective for me to do that than hire my own teacher and have it done. Then essentially the DOE will say, here's the per pupil fee that this provider is allowed to ask. And the school will then say, we're enrolling 10 kids at X fee. So a lot of the details are to become, the DOE will set all of those and negotiate all the price points. There is some flexibility in the bill for schools to be able to to say that, a student can't or shouldn't take that. So if a student is, if the school already offers the course and there's not a major, scheduling conflict, then the student will have to be required to take it at the school. And if it's also a course that the student wants to take that doesn't do anything to help them on their graduation pathway, the school can also kind of stop that. There's an appeal process for the student if they want to take it to the state board. So there's some flexibility for schools in there, but all the details and costs of that will be determined as the department kind of works to create this over the next year. Great. Does that help? So moving on to some other bills that impact charters. House Bill 1382 was a charter school bill, largely clean up kind of tweaks here and there in statute just to, fix some definitions. It does increase charter school authorizer accountability. So it changes kind of our timeline of when schools have to go to the state board if they have, changes when authorizers have to go to the state board if they have a school that's been rated an F for 4 consecutive years. So this will require them to go to the state board before they renew a school. Right now it's kind of hit or miss depending on where they come up in the renewal cycle. So some schools could potentially, or authorizers could say, okay, we're renewing you, but 2 months later we're going to have to go to the state board and they could potentially close us. So it's to kind of clean that process up. It also requires statements of economic interest for charter school board members. It requires the authorizers to collect this. This was something that, House Democrats pushed on because other school board members across the state have to do it. Marcy reached out to a number of school folks, and based on kind of the IRS code, we believe from folks that this is already happening in a lot of cases, so hopefully this doesn't present a challenge to any of you, and hopefully it doesn't cause you to lose any board members or struggle getting board members, but just wanted to make you aware of that requirement in law now. We also tweaked the charter teacher licensure law to provide more flexibility. Some of you may have kind of seen the little bit of the fiasco that happened at a couple state board meetings ago when Seven Oaks asked for some flexibility. There was a whole lot of confusion. We've had some changes with, well, we've had some disagreements with interpretation at the DOE perhaps, so this language just essentially clarifies that any license falls into that 90% category. So hopefully that clears things up for some schools and gives you all more flexibility to hire the teachers that you need. We also created a student engagement policy for virtual charter schools. And then there were a few innovation network charter tweaks. I know some of us talked about like the building tweak to make sure that Purdue Polytechnic can be an innovation school with IPS. Moving on to House Bill 1384 was a various education matter bill. Tightens up the process around how we exit students as homeschool. We've had a handful of bad actors as we started looking through the data of just lots of kids that are leaving in their high school years as a homeschooler instead of a dropout. And as we start to track some of those kids, it's very unlikely that a lot of these kids are actually being homeschooled, and it's just a way for some schools to beef up their graduation rate so it doesn't hurt their A through F letter grade. So it tightens up the process around this, gives DOE some teeth to kind of enforce and verify that kids that are leaving as homeschool are actually homeschool. It also requires the department to make an annual report about high mobility schools and students that are leaving with credit deficiencies. And then most importantly, I think it requires the state board as they consider revising our A through F metrics with ESSA to also look at the mobility of high school students who are moving around credit deficient, right? Is there, does there need to be some type of penalty or, accountability held on the school who move that student, drop that student? And do we need to give some credit to schools that take on credit deficient students and are able to move them up? So it doesn't force anything to happen. It just requires the state board to consider it and include something in there if they can find a way to balance that. But this all really gets at the issue of, we've got a number of schools that are trying to work the system to improve their letter grade. And at the end of the day, students are the ones who are falling through the cracks. 1079. So if you remember last summer, and even in the last legislative session, there was a lot of talk about how do we make sure that our students are safe, that we're doing the proper background checks, and we don't end up with teachers in a building that shouldn't be there based on confidentiality agreements or things that have been hidden from their record. So 1079 is the inclusion of a number of recommendations that were made by the Education Summer Study Committee last year. So it requires background checks for all school employees every 5 years. Expanded criminal history check and a child protection index, which is done through DCS, must be completed before anyone, for any new employee. In the past, schools had a 3-month window after employment began to get that check completed. They've changed that date from 3 months to 60 days to try to tighten that window up a little bit. That did start out as a, you had to have it by employment, but given all the feedback we got from schools and just the concern on the timing and how difficult it is to get that back, they did allow for a 60-day period. You also have to, schools are required to contact references and the most recent employer before you can hire a teacher. And it gives DOE the authority to automatically revoke a license if there's been a conviction. So the court is required to provide weekly email updates to DOE saying, here are names of people who have, been charged with a felony. In the past, DOE had to hold hearings. This allows them to automatically revoke it. And it does set up kind of a process and an appeal process if that conviction is vacated in the future for that teacher to come back and get their license.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
On 1079, the teacher license issue, a question about what about non-employee teachers, such as an Ivy Tech professor on loan or others? Do we know anything about that, or do we need to go?
So we may need to double check on some of those. I mean, I think it's very clear that it says all school employees. Need to double check the language of that. Now, where it could get tricky is if, if it's a, Ivy Tech professor that's online or how some of that works out. We'll need to double check that. but we'll take a closer look at that and see exactly what all employees, but certainly everyone in the building is covered under this law, as I believe.
And then I think maybe going back one slide, is there any more information available at this time about this statement of economic interest issue?
I mean, we can go back and it's a very brief kind of requirement in the statute. We can pull that language, but it doesn't give a whole lot of detail about what needs to be on the economic interest statement. It just says there has to be one. We can try to provide you examples that we've received from other schools that do this, if that would help.
Is this something that you think that the authorizers are probably going to have like a standard form? Is that?
Yes, the bill requires the authorizers to be the collection point of this. So you won't have to turn it into the state. It's just as you are, applying for a charter or renewing through your authorizer, this is information that you'll have to provide to your authorizer. So, I mean, I know the state charter board already requires this. I believe Ball State does, but I need to double check on that. So I think it already exists, and for many people, you won't notice a difference based on the authorizers are already requiring some of this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Senate Bill 30, student information. So this started out from a new superintendent to the state, kind of came and said, I want to compete. I want to make sure I know, that my school is competing for students, but I don't know how to compete if I don't know where my students are going. And so her answer was the Department of Ed should tell me how many voucher students have left my school and to what voucher schools they're going to. The irony in that statement was that there wasn't a single voucher school in the entire county that this superintendent works in. So when we actually broke down the numbers and looked at it, the majority of students that her school corporation is losing isn't going to a voucher or a charter school. They're going to other neighboring public school districts. So this bill kind of turned into a bill that'll essentially require more transparency, which I think will be a great tool for everyone in the school choice world. But, superintendents will now get a list from the DOE. Here are all the students who live in your district who went to who are attending a different public school district and what school district, who are attending a charter school and what charter school, and who are attending a voucher school and what voucher school. They have to be very careful. They cannot release any student identifying information. I mean, all of FERPA will have to be there, so we don't expect any schools to start going after students. It's just an aggregate form to show here's where your students are going. I think this will be very helpful in the grand scheme of things. We constantly hear at the State House that charters and vouchers are, stealing money from public schools, even though charters are public schools. So I think when this information becomes more widely available and posted on DOE's website for the world to consume, you'll see that there are nearly 50,000 kids who are using, public-to-public transfer. So live in one district and go elsewhere. No one wants to complain about those kids stealing money from the system in their school. So I think it has the potential to kind of change the conversation. But that shouldn't require any additional reporting from your end. All the work should be done on the Department of Ed's team.
Will charter schools get similar reports?
They should.
Great.
Well, except no, they won't, because you have a statewide district, right? You don't have an actual district of where your students come from. So you'll be able to access all the online information to see where your kids are coming from, all that. But since you don't have a district, the DOE is not required to report directly to you to tell you where your kids are going or aren't going, because that would require them to tell you where every kid in the state is going, if that makes sense.
Okay. I mean, they could just look at students who used to be enrolled in that school and left, but it just seems like it's putting a lot of onus on charters to keep tracking of their students, not putting that same onus on district schools to do the tracking themselves.
Fair. The way it's set up, though, is all based on where you live, your geographic boundaries.
Okay.
Senate Bill 504, there were some schools I think that were already able to access this, but this just makes it much clearer that I think some education service centers weren't allowing this, but this gives the ability for every charter school and every non-public school to become a dues-paying member of an education service center. This could be a win-win for everyone. If if your ESC is something that you think provides valuable services, the more members they have, the lower dues become. So this could be a great way to do, group purchasing and drive down costs. And now we get into kind of the bills that are requiring some, additional mandates. We fought all session long on new mandates for schools. We're successful in defeating a lot of those, but there were some that got through despite our best intentions. So Senate Bill 29 and Senate Bill 337 are new curriculum requirements. So this requires all school corporations, all charters, and all accredited non-publics or voucher schools to offer an Indiana Studies course, which is Senate Bill 29, and Senate Bill 337 requires the study of ethnic and racial groups. So this has to be a one-semester course offered in high school. You don't have to provide the course, you have to offer the course, right? So if no one signs up for it, you don't have to have a teacher there to teach it. We were successful at the end of the day, though, to at least get language in there that says a school can offer this via the Course Access Program. So we talked about House Bill 1007 earlier and the program that the department is supposed to set up. So if you have 5 kids that are interested in taking one of these courses but don't have the staff time or capacity to teach this in your building, the department will have to create a course access program for these 2 specific semester courses, so you could provide it via an online course access to the department. So again, we'll know more once the department builds this out, but you do have a little bit of flexibility here, but unfortunately we couldn't prevent this altogether. Senate Bill 29 also requires the department to conduct a survey of educators regarding cursive writing and whether or not it should be mandated. So for years now, Senator Leising has tried to pass a bill that would require all schools to teach cursive writing. This year, the final language that got in during conference committee requires the DOE to at least survey and see, how many schools are already doing this, how many schools, want to continue doing it, are mandated. So we have information from that. We'll be sure to share it with you all. House Bill 1430 is suicide awareness and prevention. So this requires, again, traditional publics, charters, and accredited non-public schools, who are teaching grades 5 through 12. They have to have their teachers participate and use suicide awareness and prevention courses every 3 years. And this begins for the 18-19 school year. So of course, this is, obviously this one and the next bill I'm going to talk about are obviously very serious issues that impact families all across the state. Doesn't necessarily mean that the best place to do this is in a school, but the legislature decided that they're going to do this. Senate Bill 355, child abuse education and policies. So again, it requires traditional publics, charters, and accredited non-public schools to provide age-appropriate instruction on child abuse to students in K-12. Again, that begins for the 18-19 school year. This also included language that Representative Boehning, he brought this issue up every time one of these bills came before his committee, and it simply urges the Summer Study Committee, the Education Summer Study Committee, to take a look at, all of the teacher training requirements that we have, that focus on student behavior and health issues. The legislature has a tendency to look at every societal ill and say, well, maybe if we can put a program in our schools, we can fix it. But at some point, we're either going to need to add, 50 more days to the school year in order to accomplish everything that we tell you have to do, or we're going to have to scale some of this back and figure out what's education and what needs to happen elsewhere. So they're at least going to take a look at that this summer. So, if you know of things that, that's on your required list to do that you don't think makes sense from a school standpoint, let us know, because that issue will be coming up this summer, and there'll be a chance to kind of clean some of that up potentially. Or if you have better ideas on how these services could be provided. I think we all agree that they're important, and we need to make sure staff and students understand these, but how we go about getting that information across, is there a better way to do it? We would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions on that. So with that, I'm happy to take any additional questions on stuff we covered or haven't covered.
One question just came in about getting a copy of the presentation. Assuming all goes well, we will be archiving the recording of this on our website, and we'll send out that information as soon as we, hopefully by next week, as soon as we're able to post that. So you'll be able to view it and take the information from there. Anyone else? There's a lot of information. Oh, here we go. So thank you. We are happy to provide this for all of you. We know that you don't have time or the energy to follow all these issues in detail. So
yeah, and we'll continue to look through these as they go. I mean, we're still I'm still trying to, recover from a legislative session and go through every little detail. So as questions pop up, as you get, MOUs or not MOUs, but memos from the DOE or others on, new laws going into effect, please let us know if you have questions. We're happy to help. I will say that, we have up on our IQE's Action Center, many of you use it throughout session to contact legislators, so thank you for doing that. It definitely makes a difference when legislators come up to me in the hallway at the State House and say, I'm hearing from your people. They do notice that. They do appreciate that. We have a thank you up there now, so feel free to go on, and it's set up right now as specific, thank you for charter funding. You can edit that message as much as you want. There's also a way, if you go to kind of find your legislator, you can type an individual message to any individual legislator, so please feel free to use that. It's a great, easy way to get in touch with legislators. The last thing I would like to encourage you all, and we're happy to help and are trying to encourage legislators as well, but with so many new legislators as we've had turnover, there are still a lot of folks who, maybe they live in rural Indiana or outside of, I mean, there are a lot of legislators who have never been inside of a charter school or really know what a charter school is because they don't have any in their district. So we're doing our best to get more and more people to come visit charter schools. So please, if you haven't already, reach out to your legislators, invite them to your school, let us know when they come, take pictures, send them to us. We're happy to promote that and encourage those legislators for doing that. We may look at doing, as we get started, the next school year gets started, we may look at doing some bus tours to get more legislators. So if you're interested in that, if you have ideas on how to get legislators more interested and involved in charter schools, please let us know. But it's very important that they know you, see the work you do, see the students you serve. It'll make future legislative sessions go much smoother for charter schools. So I think a question about, are there any ed bills that have been sent to the governor for which there's a risk that he won't sign? Not that we've heard of yet. I think the governor is going to be going on vacation. I think he leaves this weekend, will be out all next week. So we've been told that he's either going to sign or veto any bill he has by the end of today. I've been following most of the bigger issues that kind of passed in the last day. Weren't signed as of last night, but I don't believe there's any real threat of a veto on those.
Here's one question that just came in about this too.
Barb asked about the pathways requirement for the pre-K pilot for charters. I'm not exactly sure what you're referencing there, Barb, but would be happy to chat offline and we can get the specific answer to you. Any other questions?
Again, feel free to, as Caitlin already said, follow up with us if you think of any other questions. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll let you know when this is posted so you can review it again and share it with other folks in your communities. And I will also forward the link that Caitlin has shared with you on this screen if you feel so inclined to thank your legislators. But we thank you, as always, for joining us, participating in our events, and we look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Have a great day and a great weekend.
Thanks.